So we're recording this, and I think it's going out live streaming to Facebook as well. So tonight we are on the history of NLP. And of course the reason, as being trainers of NLP and Neuro-Semantics, it's good to know the history because people will ask you some things about the history. And some of the history has got some family secrets that are not the most pleasant secrets. And so my attitude is Virginia Satir's statement, a family is as sick as its secrets. And it's as healthy as its transparency. So let's be transparent. There's no need to cover things up. We can say what is and what we've learned from it. And so the history of NLP. So as we start, of course, these three letters, strange letters. Do you want to know what it is? So, are you ready to enter the matrix and understand where NLP really came from? Are you ready to take the red pill? Now, you can take the blue pill and wake up on your bed and just believe whatever you want to believe. Or you can take the red pill and let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes. Well, it began with three crazy and unlikely guys. You know Richard Bandler, you know of John Grinder, and the person that has not gotten the recognition that he deserves is Frank Puselic. And so, of these three, they put it together. It started actually with Frank and Richard. Frank and Richard started a Gestalt class, and then later they invited John into it. And I'll tell you the story of how Frank was really put out. So here's some pictures of Richard and John, and then Frank, a more modern day picture. If you want to see an old picture in the book, I think it's Virginia Satir's book that Richard wrote with her and John wrote with her. There's a picture. We may have that. It started in Santa Cruz, California, on the Pacific Ocean. Here is a big carnival type of a place. In 1997, this is where the NLP Leadership Summit was held. And 200 of us met there in the year 1997, trying to pull the field together. That was during the lawsuit, and we came together there at Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is on a hill and a thriving little city there, and that's where it began. It's right on the Pacific Ocean. This is a larger view of that area. A beautiful little place. It's difficult to get there. There's like one road that comes from San Jose down through the mountains and to Santa Cruz. Oops. So the University of California at Santa Cruz is where it all started. University, California at Santa Cruz. And that university has 10 colleges. And Kresge College is the college where John was a professor and everybody else were taking classes at Kresge. And so here is some of the dorms. These are redwood trees. These are not the big ones. These are little redwood trees, or, little redwood trees. There's the dorm. This is up on the mountain that overlooking Santa Cruz. And Robert Spitzer. So Robert Spitzer was a key person in the whole field. Once they had put the first book together, Robert Spitzer, who was the publisher of science and behavior books, and he was the publisher for Virginia. He was a publisher of a lot of Fritz's works and a lot of the New Age movement, human potential movement. He invited Richard, first of all, when Richard was 17 years old, to teach his son playing the guitar. Later, when Richard came to the college and was taking courses, he needed some money, so he was hired to be in the warehouse and to stock the warehouse. And this was 1972, and Fritz had died 2 years earlier. He died in 1970, January of 1970, and Fritz had a box of audio tapes and some big reels, the 8mm reels, and he was up in Canada, and after he died, they took this box and sent it to Spitzer. And so Spitzer brought all of this stuff in and set it on the floor and said, Richard, I want you to listen to this and transcribe it. And that's what initiated for Richard the beginning. So he began transcribing the audio tapes from Fritz Perls. Now, Fritz Perls defined himself and described himself as a dirty old man. Do you know the title of his autobiography? In and Out of the Garbage Can. I mean, who would put a title like that on your biography? But he was kind of a dirty old man. He had learned psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud had rejected him and put him down. He was in South Africa, and he went up to Vienna to meet Freud, and he knocked on the door, and Freud just wouldn't even invite him in. And he was so disappointed, he started Gestalt psychotherapy. Gestalt therapy was based upon Gestalt psychology. And so Richard started hearing Fritz. Now, Fritz talked in a little deep voice, and he had kind of a froggy voice, and he would say, now, come to your senses and lose your mind. And he would talk that way. Richard loved that. And so Richard had the gift when he was 20 years old, 21, to mimic. And that's what he did. He would just mimic. Spitzer, Dr. Spitzer, in 1990, wrote an article for Anchor Point, and he described his experience with Richard and that scene. And he said he would walk into the room, and Richard would look up and go, hello, Robert. And Robert Spitzer would say, Fritz, I mean Richard. Because Richard really has the ability to mimic and to do auditory copying. So this is what started it. He would hear all this stuff as he was transcribing, and he just loved the soundtrack and would copy it. So Fritz developed it from Gestalt psychology. That psychology was developed by Max Wertheimer, and Max Wertheimer was one of the mentors of Maslow. So we start getting some overlap between different people. Max Wertheimer was so impressed Abraham Maslow back in 1937 that Maslow chose him as one of the good humans that he wanted to study to understand how do you become a good human, which later became self-actualizing people. Anyway, Fritz developed that, and he made a big deal. If you read his books, don't ask why, ask how. So that came from Gestalt. Lose your mind, come to your senses. Get out of your computer mind. These are all statements from Fritz Perls, and obviously made a big impact on the field of NLP. So Richard Bandler played around with copying the voice and the language patterns until he could do Fritz, and once he joined up with Frank, they decided to do a Gestalt class. Now, Frank had studied Gestalt therapy at San Diego, transferred up to Kresge College, and nobody was teaching Gestalt. And one of the things about Kresge College was that the students could create their own course, run their own course, and then apply for credit for it. And so somehow, and Frank does not remember how he met Richard, but they met, and they both had this interest in Gestalt, so they started a class. and they had 12 or 15 people who Frank started calling the meta people, the meta kids. So they started doing Gestalt. Now, Gestalt, one of the big things was the empty chair. Put your mother in the chair, and we want you to talk to her. And so you talk to her, and then what is she saying? So, and so they would do this, and so when they started doing this, because Richard knew the language patterns, people started having tremendous effects, tremendous results, and they were going, "How are we doing this?" I think Richard was doing it just for the fun of it. I don't think he cared anything about helping anybody, or I think it was just the fun of talking in that voice. But Frank was serious. He was studying the psychology, and he was trying to do that. So there was this book that Fritz had started, Gestalt Therapy Observed and Witnessed to Therapy. There's a copy of the book, and Richard is recognized as the translator and the transcriber, and it came out in 1972 or 3, and when it was published, Dr. Spitzer published it. A couple other people have said that Richard just carried the book with him everywhere he went. He was so proud of it. And it's a good book. So if you want to, and it's easy to read, and it's the Gestalt, and when you read it, you'll see where so much of NLP comes from. It's really a historical book that shows the roots of NLP. And key things that we talk about are in that book, like a lot of the auditory and visual representation systems. So Fritz is the wild man, the dirty old man who pioneered this, and you can see the pictures of him. If there was anybody who was self-referent, it was Fritz Perls. I mean, he really just was the odd person out and just gloried in it to be different. So Esalen, California is a significant place in this whole history. In 1962, Michael Murphy and Dick Price created Esalen as a retreat center. They bought it. They built up some of the buildings that were there. It was an old Indian retreat center. Hot springs, hot sulfur springs are right there next to the ocean. And it was a resort for many years, a spa where people would go and relax and get massages and sit in the hot tubs. Well, they bought it, and this became the headquarters of the Human Potential Movement, 1962. 1962, the second person to do a workshop at Esalen was Gregory Bateson. And in 1963, Fritz Perls moved there to be scholar in residence. And the last scholar in residence was Gregory Bateson. He moved there in 1975, and he died there in 1980. So Esalen played a big part because that's where the human potential movement is. And it was the center of the human potential movement until 1978 or 1980 when they went bankrupt, and then they changed it. And to this day, Esalen is the unification of Eastern and Western religions. That's their visionary statement now. But before that, it was the human potential movement. So Perls takes us to Esalen, headquarters of the human potential movement. And so Esalen began 1962, 63. And here's some. Virginia moves there in 1964 to Esalen. She becomes the director of training and development. I discovered this in 2005. I mean, many years later, I was studying about the human potential movement and self-actualization, and came across this, and it just stopped me in my tracks. What? I did not know they knew each other. I did not know they worked together. I did not know they lived in the same place. I did not know they were second generation leaders of the human potential movement. So as soon as I discovered that in 2005, I wrote up a paper, The Secret History of NLP. Because it was in none of the books. None of the books ever told us where some of this stuff came from, or that they were leaders, second generation leaders of the human potential movement. So now I know that NLP is a birth child of the human potential movement. So we stand on their shoulders, and that's why the psychology of self-actualization psychology, humanistic psychology, that's the psychology we stand on, because it's the psychology of the bright side of human nature. And that's why we do not stand on the shoulders of Sigmund Freud looking at how things can go wrong. So I think it's pretty significant. And I've shared in 2005, 6, 7, 8, I went around to a lot of the NLP conferences and presented that, and people just, we didn't know. But now it's been manifest, and it's in lots of different books. This clicker is not working, or I pushed something on hold. So someone who's a technology expert, help me out here. The David Murphy law. Okay. So, the secret history of NLP, the who's who of NLP, lived and worked and led the human potential movement at Esalen. So, pretty significant. Now we go back to Frank, and Frank set up the Gestalt class he and Richard ran at Santa Cruz, and they were essentially just presenting what Fritz had presented. It was just Gestalt class, and they went through all the Gestalt stuff and all the exercises. And I know you can't read all the letters here, but these are the people, and the people at the top you probably have never heard of, except for maybe Terry McClendon. Terry wrote the book, the first history book, The Wild Days of NLP, 1972 to 1979. And so Terry was in that first group, and then he transferred over, so his name's there twice. So there were several groups, several classes, and we don't know how many. I've tried to research this and find out, but there was at least 4 or 5 different classes. And in 1975, Robert Dales, Judith Lozer, Leslie Cameron Bandler, David Gordon, Todd Epstein, Terry McClendon, and Stephen Gilligan were some of the key people who attended that class, the Gestalt class. And what they were working out was the meta model. Now, the reason they were working out the meta model was because Richard and Frank were seeing all these changes, transformation before their eyes, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. So they went to John. They asked him several times before he finally came and said to John, you know transformational grammar. You know linguistic distinctions and pieces. Come and just see what we're doing and see if you can figure it out. So that's how John got involved in that. And these are the people who actually created the meta model. So Richard and John are given credit because they wrote the book. And in the book, they did not give reference. They claimed it as if it was their own. And they left Frank out completely. So what I put here is NLP began as a collaborative community. And to me, that's the vision to get back to. A collaborative community where we together, with collective learning and collective understanding, will add together things and recover that kind of creativity. Gregory Bateson, professor at the university, he met John and Richard, and he had a home up on one of the mountains, one of the hills around Santa Cruz, and had a little shed there, and so he invited them to live on their property. He was also the professor there that everybody studied, so everybody went to his classes, and that's why he has such an influence on NLP. He really popularized the word meta. He really popularized the word frame. And in his book, Steps to an Ecology of Mind, you'll see that. And he was the one who really made that public and popularized that. Gregory Bateson, British professor who came to Santa Cruz. Richard and Frank discovered that they were replicating the results that Fritz would get, but didn't understand why. So they brought John in. John was a Green Beret before he became a professor. He was in the Army and a Green Beret and fought for the American Army. And then sometime about 1972 or 3, he flipped. And he decided that the whole military thing was wrong. He protested against the Vietnam War, and he led protests against it and shifted everything to a very liberal philosophy, and said at different times that he would like to destroy the American military and the government. He taught a class on Marxist economics. So that's my sense of why he has disliked me so much, because I'm definitely not Marxist in any philosophy. Virginia Satir, family systems. After Fritz, Virginia, because she was being published by Dr. Spitzer, and because she lived in Santa Cruz, and because she was a close friend also of Gregory, and she found out about this class, and she started attending, just as an observer. And then they decided that they were going to start modeling Virginia. Now, there's lots of books. The most popular one is People Making. And her big emphasis was on building up self-esteem, or good sense of self. And so they started modeling her, and maybe I have a piece on this. The transformational grammar that came together, because they started figuring out how these two people could create so much change and transformation just by talking to people. And that's why they pulled out all the meta-model distinctions. So Frank was a hidden man behind all of this, the invisible co-creator, and here's my analysis of it. He was the collaborator, he was the connector, and the other two were the mavens. If you read the book by Malcolm Gladwell, The Outliers, he talks about social changes and social developments, and he says most social cultural revolutions involve three people. The mavens, who's got the special knowledge. The connector, who connects people together, the connector, and the salesperson. So Tony Robbins, obviously, is the salesperson. But Frank was the connector. He connected both of them. And he connected all these meta kids. And to this day, if you meet Frank, and so David has, and Omar has, and Muhammad has, at the NLP conference, Leadership Summit, he is a jolly, friendly, outgoing, arms around you person. He's the connector. So he put them all together in that way. So before I go to Milton Erickson, back to Virginia. Virginia was up in Canada doing a extensive training. And Dr. Spitzer said to Richard, I want you to go up there, record everything she's doing, bring the recordings back here, and we're going to transcribe what she's doing. So Richard went up there. He got into the sound booth and was recording it and managing the sound on the stage. Virginia was at a university with master degree people in psychology. These were going to be therapists. So she would do family systems up on stage, and she would do family sculpturing up on stage. And so one day it is said that Richard was back in the sound booth, and he turned on Pink Floyd inside that sound booth. And apparently it was so loud that it disturbed her. Now, Virginia was 6'4". She was a big German woman. One of my friends said that when he attended one of her workshops, he noticed her foot, and she said that she had a size 13 foot. Because he noticed that she stomped on somebody one time and kept them down. I mean, a big woman. Now, Richard's 5'6". Now, you think I'm scary. She opened that booth, this giant of a woman, and looks down to Richard and says, what are you doing with this music? And Richard's quick. He says, you do 7 patterns. Interrupted her state. She said, what? And he called off the first 4, and she said, yes, 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 yes. And then he called off 3 more, and she said, I didn't know. But now that you said them, they all make sense. And so that was his way of getting out of trouble. But then he said, anybody could do that. I could do that. He's 21 years old. He's 22 years old. Anybody could do that. Now, I have to give it to Richard that he is bold and courageous. He rushes in where angels fear to tread. And so she said, okay, young man, get up on stage and do it. He got up on stage, saw the patterns. I mean, language and hearing and patterning was his gift. He got up on stage and ran the family sculpturing, and she just went, my God, how do you do that? Because these people have been studying it for 2 or 3, 4 years. Well, that's Richard's gift of patterning and modeling. So that impressed her, so she started coming to the groups, and they started modeling from her. From her, we found the VAK, because she was real distinct about, are you saying it or seeing it or feeling it? She was real clear. They got anchoring from her. I mean, they got a lot of pieces from Virginia. And so that's family systems. So that went on until 1975. In 1975, Gregory Bateson said, my good friend, Milton Erickson, over in the desert in Phoenix, it does magical, wonderful things. He's considered the wizard of the desert. And that was one of the titles of Milton. So they said, go see Milton. And so they went to see Milton to start modeling his language patterns. And so that was 1975 that they found that. Frank did not go. Now, Frank moved to Santa Cruz with his wife, Judith DeLozer. Judith DeLozer. So Judith DeLozer and Frank were married. They moved to Santa Cruz. They separated. John Grinder eventually marries Judith. Frank dates Leslie Cameron. They become life partners. And when Leslie went to Phoenix with the rest of them, when she came back, she separated from Frank and eventually married Richard. Yeah, he was a connector. Now, in 2010, when I met Frank for the first time, and then I heard him speak, he says this to Judith DeLozer's chagrin. I mean, Judith Judith can't stand it when he says this. He says, I prepared their wives for them. Now, so this is some of the family secrets. So they weren't swapping wives, but they got close to it. So then Robert Dilts came in 1975, and I put there, he put his genius to work in organizing what Frank and Richard and John were creating and finding. Because it was Robert deserves so much credit because he started organizing things. He was doing his master's degree program at the university, and the papers he wrote, if you want to read those papers, they're in the book Roots of NLP and Applications of NLP. And there's serious papers in there. I think it's some of his best work because he's doing some research and everything for his master's degree. And he's organizing things. He organizes the meta model. If you read Structure of Magic, there's no structure. There's no, you will not find the 11 or 12 distinctions written down and the questions. It's just all over the place. And that's because both Richard and John can't write. And if you have insomnia, I recommend Structure of Magic. But Robert starts organizing things and putting things together. Robert, in 1980, writes NLP Volume 1, The Study of the Structure of Subject Experience. And he puts together the strategy model. And he puts together, sorts out the representational systems. And so Robert has done so much to put all that together. He came into NLP in 1975 when it was still meta. So it was all called meta before that. September 1976, we get the name NLP. Another person very early into it is Steve Andreas. Now, he came in 1978. So the meta model had been published. The 2 books of Milton Erickson had been published. And there was just four books. Steve Andreas was a Gestalt therapist. He wasn't just a Gestalt therapist, he was a famous Gestalt therapist. He had written numerous Gestalt books. He was a main leader in the field of Gestalt. His mother started Real People Press in Moab, Utah, and she wrote a book, Don't Push the River, and it's the story of her and Fritz, because they kind of fooled around a little bit. So Steve was a famous Gestalt. He goes into NLP, and he falls in love with NLP. He loves NLP so much. He and Connie Ray came in. They weren't married at the time, but they were in the process of getting married. He comes in, and he says, oh my God, this takes Gestalt to a whole new level. He left Gestalt, came into NLP, and thousands of people from Gestalt followed him. He and Connie Ray wrote the book Frogs into Princes, wrote the book Reframing, wrote the book Using Your Brain for a Change, wrote the book Transformations. Those 4 seminar books created some order to the field of NLP, gave it some order. I think Steve and Robert were the 2 people who really put it together. And neither of them have really received the credit that they deserve. So he changed his name. His name was Barry Stevens. He changed his name to Steve Andreas because he married Connie Ray Andreas. He took her name. His mother, his mother was Barry Stevens. He was John Stevens. His mother just almost had a heart attack. And, of course, when she died, he inherited Real People Press and published many, many NLP books with Real People Press for many years until he died. So Connie Ray and Steve I think they put NLP on the map with their books. And Transformation, from what I understand, has sold more NLP books than any other NLP book, and probably most NLP books together. When it was published, it immediately sold 350,000. And if you know anything about book publishing, to sell 2,000 is big. 350,000 books. Because it went into brief psychotherapy, it went into Gestalt, it went into Ericksonian therapy, and I don't know how many it has sold up till now. The book, Using Your Brain for a Change, if you've read that one. Using Your Brain for a Change. It gives you the flavor of Richard Bandler in those early days and how he put together the early NLP patterns. So, if we back up in history, long time before all of that occurred, in the 1970s, if we back up all the way to 1933, we find Alfred Korzybski. And here's a poster for one of his books. So he would be another grandfather of NLP, just like Bateson, because his ideas are so incorporated into the field of NLP. Not only the map is not the territory, not only the representational systems. I mean, he sorts out all the representational systems, shows where they fall along the electromagnetic field, where there's hearing and visual and kinesthetic, and talks about the interchange of those. But he also, in the 1950s, in the United States, went around doing neuro-linguistic training. Because he invented that word in 1941, neuro-linguistics and neuro-semantics. He used them interchangeably, but he was doing neuro-linguistic training in the 1950s and started the field of general semantics, which was a field that focused on language and mapping and abstracting and kind of an academic field. So here's Korzybski, an engineer, who asked this question in World War I think it was about 1917 or 1920. He was from Poland. He was a soldier in the First War, ranking soldier, and he started saying, every generation we build a bridge, and the next generation we build a little bit better, and the next a little bit better, and the next. He said, in the soft sciences, psychology and sociology and anthropology, it's like we never build upon anything. We just keep reinventing it. Why is that? His answer was language. Science has a specific, precise language. And they use it as a common, and they can build on it. But here, our language just is sloppy language, not precise language, and we don't have a universal language to describe beliefs and thoughts and feelings and emotions. So that's what he was working on in his life. So he invented these hyphenated words. So he's the source of that. He also used the phrase design engineering. Design engineer. He was an engineer. He was always trying to create a calculus for doing what we do. I was with Richard Bandler in 1989 at his home, and Richard was just then wanting to create human design engineering, which was a form of NLP that he promoted from about 1990 to maybe 2000, human design engineering. And we were talking, I said, so that's the name you're going to go with? And he said, yes. And I said, well, that's in Korzybski's book. Korzybski used that word. And he said, well, don't tell anybody, because it's my word. So engineer, wanted a new psychology based on correct language, and the field is general semantics. Maslow, so after and just about the same time of Korzybski, Maslow was working in New York City and coming up with his discoveries, and I tell a lot of the Maslow story in meta-coaching. So he's in New York, and those two don't meet, but each of them created one of the streams to NLP, the general semantic stream and the human potential movement stream. So Abraham Maslow founded the third force in psychology, and that began that development. He modeled Max Wertheimer, and he modeled Ruth Benedict. Now, Ruth Benedict was the mentor of Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead, anthropologist, wife of Gregory Bateson. The webs we weave. So Maslow started his study of self-actualizing people, and he started with these two that were key people in anthropology and in psychology, psychiatry. Abraham Maslow developed this paradigm shift, talking about the needs, and he answered a question in the field of psychology in the 1930s, which is the most important human need? And people had just had all this and this and this, and he said, all of you are correct. Those are human needs. But they're not all at the same level. We need some more in a primitive way. We need some as we fulfill and we go up. And there's unique human needs that the animals don't have. And that, because he started mapping out the higher nature, and that we have a higher nature. And we're not satisfied with just food and shelter and money and friends. It's like, what else is there? Something else. We have a spirit that longs for meaning, for purpose, for love, for contributing, for making a difference, for justice, for fairness. And that longing is what he started mapping out that the earlier psychologists had really ignored. Carl Rogers joined Maslow in 1940s as he started now thinking the same way. There must be a brighter side of human nature, and some people seem to know how to actualize their highest and best and become fully functioning human beings, fully functioning mentally, emotionally, verbally, and behaviorally. And so we want to understand, how do they do this? And so that's the bringing out the best in a person, Carl Rogers. So that's the background that led up to the 1970s. And by the end of the 1970s, NLP was really popular. In 1979, in Psychology Today, July 1979, Daniel Goleman, a young journalist, a young scientific psychologist journalist, went to Santa Cruz and interviewed Richard and John and wrote an article, The People Who Read People. And it was a positive, very positive description of NLP, 1979. Now, if you read Daniel Goleman today, whether it's emotional intelligence or social intelligence, and you go back to, you won't see one book that references anything in NLP. So something happened in the 1980s that turned him off and turned a lot of people off. So the question is what happened in the 1980s? Well, the original developers and thinkers, including Judith Dozier and Robert Dilts, they turned the wild days into a community. And so thank goodness for them as they did that. They were joined by Leslie Cameron, Steve and Connie Ray, Steve Gilligan. He has put his focus on hypnotic language, and he does trance camp to this day, Stephen Gilligan. And then Wyatt Woodsmull, who has written a number of books, and he created several associations. He created the International Association of NLP Trainers. And it was the International Association of NLP Trainers that in 1994, 1995 gave me an award for developing metastates. And they announced that it was the most significant contribution to the field of NLP in those years. So that was Wyatt who led that. Wyatt is still a part of the NLP Leadership Summit. He's getting older. I learned a lot of my original NLP from Wyatt. Intelligent, astute, really refined, and he wrote the book with Tad James, Timeline Therapy and the Structure of Personality, meta-programs. So this was a young Judith, and this is an older Judith. And they put together NLP-U, which up until the pandemic, every summer, you could go to NLP-U, take NLP practitioner, NLP master practitioner at that college, at the Cresty College, because the school's out for the summer, so they rent that, and they call it NLP-U. And Omar has gone there many times, David has gone there many times to study, and so they put that together. Is that Teresa? All right. Here they are again, putting together Teresa Epstein. Teresa was married to Todd Epstein, and Todd died, must have been 1996, something like that. A young man tragically died. Todd was the one who said to Richard, what are we going to call these submodalities? And before they were called submodalities, Todd said we should call them psychographics. Psychographics, it's close or far, or loud or quiet. And they have a psychological effect. And Richard said, psychographics, that's too complicated. Let's call them submodalities. They were not very well on branding. Tony Robbins, so he comes into the scene in early 1980s. He probably learned NLP from Richard and John when they were still together in 81, maybe early 82. And so he learns practitioner. He doesn't learn master practitioner. They were just developing master practitioner. It had not been developed in 1982. They were just working on that. He hires a ghostwriter, writes the book Unlimited Power, and it sells 3 million copies. Simon & Schuster. Now, I don't know how much he paid that ghostwriter or how much he paid Simon & Schuster, but I'm sure he got all of his money back. And of course, he has brought more people into NLP than probably all the rest of us put together, because he's a salesman. And so he put that together and bringing in 3,000 people, 5,000 people, and just month after month after month for year after year after year. And in 1987, I think it was, Wyatt taught him master practitioner privately. So even though he became a master practitioner, he never became a trainer. So because of all the popularity, Richard sues him in 1988 or 89 for $5 million because he's not certifying people in the Society of NLP. And back then, every person you certified, you paid $200 royalty. And so Richard sued him. The lawsuit took a number of years, and Tony finally settled out of court. The year I was with Richard in 1989, 1990, at his home in San Francisco, the courier came. It just so happened I was there when the courier came and brought the signed contract from Tony. Tony said, okay, from now on, I'll certify everybody in NLP and pay my $200. And so he signed the contract. And he gave him a check for $500,000 to sell the contract. And so Richard opened that and looked at that and said, and he would talk about a happy man. We were in his dining room, and if he could have gotten on top of the table, I think he would have danced because he was really happy. And I said to him, I said, well, what stops Tony from changing the name and not doing this? And now, this is the rough language Richard used. I grabbed him by the balls and squeezed. He wouldn't dare. Next year, Tony dared. Neural associative conditioning. Never paid a royalty, never certified people in NLP, certified people in neural associative conditioning. And from that day on, every time he was on Larry King or any other majors, would not say the 3 letters. And years later, I wish I had thought at the time, but years later, I thought, you just shot and kicked out the greatest salesperson you could have had. If you had just put the mantle and say, Tony, bring me the world. Tony could have. But the way Richard treated him, Tony has no tolerance for that. And so he mentions NLP in his seminars, but he does not mention it publicly. So lost the greatest salesman that we could have had. So that's Tony. So there's the lawsuit against Tony, and because he wasn't an official trainer. If I saw one of you having the skill of Tony, we would say, just forget the benchmarking. For God's sake, you don't need it. So if you find, my attitude is, if I find someone who is so much more skilled than I want to bring them on the team. I don't want to kick them out and feel like, well, you're showing me up. I want people more skilled and more competent and more intelligent than myself to surround me. And that's really the theme of our community. So what happened in the 1980s? Well, NLP started dividing. So we had the Bandler group, we had the Grinder group, and we had the Tad James group. And that was the first ones that started separating out into major groups in the 1980s. And then Bandler was arrested for murder. NLP has a darker side. Do you want to know what it is? Oh, we haven't hit the darkness yet. There's the seal for the Society of NLP. So in 1986, Richard Bandler charged in the death of Corinne Christensen, who was described constantly in the court as a prostitute. She was murdered. A gunshot, a single gunshot went right into her forehead and just dropped dead immediately. 1988, a grand jury comes back and says that they can't make up their mind and they're not going to send it to trial. And part of the reason is because James Marino, a drug dealer, and Richard Bandler were the 2 men in the house where Corinne was shot in the head. And so 3 people in the house, they found a lot of cocaine, they were snorting cocaine, they were doing LSD, they were having some party. And so it's a drug dealer and Richard Bandler and this woman. She ends up dead, so they wonder, drug dealer, Richard Bandler. You would think it would be no, but they don't arrest the drug dealer, they arrest Richard. Now, I have a whole chapter in the book, The Secrets of NLP, about that. So I go into a lot of details there. But this is what created it. The Mother Jones magazine writes a full article calling it the Bandler method. And so when he's declared not guilty because they don't have enough evidence and James kept saying he did it, and Richard kept saying he did it, and there was evidence for both. James Merrill, the drug dealer, he went to the police and told them where the gun was. So he took them out and showed them the bay over the Pacific Ocean, said it's down there, right there, and they sent a diver down, found it. And so made it seem like he knew where the gun was, and it was Richard's gun. So when I met Richard, he looked like that. He was quite heavy. And there's more to the dark side. Are you ready to know what it is? I can only show you the truth. You have to walk through the door. And here's the darkest side of all. They did not apply NLP to themselves. From the very, very beginning, they were the mavens who gave the information. The group would practice. They wouldn't practice with the group. Frank practiced with the group. And Frank would go back to Richard and John and say, here's what happened. And Richard and John would come up with a new exercise or a new idea, and Frank would come back to the group and they would do it, and Frank would report back. When I was with Richard, Richard would say, he would sit on the stool and he would say, I can't do NLP on myself. A few years later, he would say, I always do NLP on myself. But that was the first lawsuit, and the 1996 one was the last one. So in 1995, Richard sued John and 7 other people, and then he named 200 John Does, which in American legal term mean 200 people are going to be named. Right now they're just John Does, but there's going to be 200 more people named. Well, talk about scaring the field. Because all of us are going to sue me. And that's what, in the United States, why people just go, I don't do NLP Center anymore. I mean, they started running. So that lawsuit happened, and it was over the silliest, stupidest thing. Steve Andreas invited John in 1995 to come to Denver, Colorado, and do a 3-day workshop. Now, the original lawsuit between Richard and John was 1981, and John signed it. To this day, I don't know why John signed it, but the lawsuit was we separate, we go our separate ways, we don't work together, and I agree that Richard can prescribe the cities in the United States that I train in, and I'm allowed to train in 6 cities a year. And why John signed that just doesn't make any sense, but John signed it. So in 1995, Richard said, I did not prescribe that city to you, so you violated the contract. So that was the legal basis for suing it. And so he sued Steve Andreas and Connie because they had the center. He sued and then added some other people to it, 7 altogether, and 200 John Does. So that began the lawsuit. It was a $90 million lawsuit. It was Richard's way of trying to control the field. So in 1995, I get a document in the mail from First Institute of NLP in San Francisco, and it's a new contract. Because I signed the original contract, and every time I certified someone, I sent $200. And so I got a new contract, so I read through it. One paragraph said, anything I develop, having learned NLP, anything I develop out of NLP is Richard Bandler's intellectual property. I crossed it out and put my signature there, crossed it out. Later on in the contract, it said, if Richard decides to sue me, I accept that I will be responsible for all financial legal charges. Crossed that out, initialed it, signed the contract except for those 2, and I had just finished a training with 20 people, so I wrote a check for $4,000 for my royalties and sent it. 1 week later, it comes back with a statement, you're no longer an NLP trainer. And that happened to many, 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 many people in 1995, 96, as he was trying to take control of the field. So this was a tremendous lawsuit. By the way, this is Chris Hall, no relation. She was the president of the Society of NLP that year. She was being mentored by Richard. She was one of my trainers when I took NLP in 1988, 89. She was one of my trainers, and she was just excellent, just a very smart lady. So the lawsuit was against the field, and it began with 5 people, and then 9, and then 200 John Does. It ended in February 2000 in San Diego, and NLP was declared in public domain, and Richard lost the lawsuit, and he had a judgment against him by the court for $600,000 that he owed to Chris and the president of the society. And I just made a little comment, it essentially killed NLP in the United States. So that's why there's just not much NLP in the United States. It's everywhere else, but not there. So in the year 2000, a picture of both of them. And so that's when Neuro-Semantics began. Due to the lawsuit and the fact that I'm no longer an NLP trainer with a society, I talked to Bob. He and I have been in close association, email, phone, and said, what are we going to do? And with 2 others, Keith Lester and Robert Olick, we said, we're going to start this. And looking back now is like, what was the big deal? But at that time, Keith said, it's too dangerous because I don't want to get Richard on my bad side. And Robert said the same thing. So Bob and I said, okay, we'll do it. So we trademarked and registered Neuro-Semantics so that we would have some legal entity to train under. And that's what a lot of other people did. They just changed the name. So we started in 1996, and that's the year it was trademarked. There's Bob Bodenhammer. So he and I did a lot of things at the beginning. 1994 was when I found the metastates model as I was modeling resilience. That was at Denver, 1994. Wrote the first book in 95. And then Bob was such a big encourager. I looked upon it and said, okay, we got one thing. And Bob said, no, you don't have one thing. You got a lot of things. And so we started looking at timelines, sleight of mouth patterns, submodalities, metaprograms through the lens of metastates to look at the metastructures. And as we did, we started writing books. We wrote 4 books before we ever met. We did it on just the email back and forth. It wasn't until 1997 that I met Bob. Bob flew into my city, and then we drove to Santa Cruz to the NLP Leadership Summit in 1997, and that was our first time we ever met. I realized I didn't know what he looked like. So I emailed him and said, I'm going to pick you up at the airport. What do you look like? So he sent me a picture. I took the picture. Where's Bob? So then we turned a lot of things, and what it essentially did was to remodel NLP. 1995, while we were in the process of trademarking, Bob was one of those early adapters, and he created a website. And one day he picked up the phone, called me, and said, Michael, I've created a website, and we need a visionary statement, because he's from North Carolina, you know. He said, So he created the website, and I created the vision statement. And with the vision statement, the fascinating thing, once we got the vision up there, we're taking NLP to a higher level. In ethics, in professionalism. We're going to ask people to collaborate and work together. We're going to ask people to give credit to sources. And so we put that vision there. And just day by day, people would call one of us and say, I want to join. I remember the first person who called me and said they want to join. I called Bob. I said, Bob, someone wants to join. And Bob said, Michael, there's people here who want to join. And I said, what are we going to do? And so we said, let's announce they're joined. And then I said, what did they join exactly? This is how far in the future we were thinking. So we invented it as we went. But there was a hunger, there was a thirst for higher ethics, higher morality, apply to self. There was just a hunger for that. So that's about the reflexivity model, the metastates model, going back and using and rediscovering Bateson and Korzybski. So if NLP has some of them in NLP, we have a whole lot more of Bateson's work and Korzybski work in Neuro-Semantics. So we were taking NLP to a new level. Colin Cox is here. I think Abraham Lincoln is out of place and time, space, but makes me feel good that Lincoln is there. So we create the website and the vision statement. Neuro-Semantics discovers a higher structure of meaning. Meaning is not just mere representation. It's reflexivity. This is the distinction between NLP and Neuro-Semantics. Reflexivity, not just mere representation. And when you know that, you're in the matrix. So Neuro-Semantics takes it to a higher level, personally, professionally, ethically, and we focus on self-application, collaboration, acknowledging sources, and quality. So that's what we set up from the beginning, and that's still our theme to this day. Since that day, we've been creating a lot of new models. So one of the things unique about Neuro-Semantics that's really not so unique about, there's been a few new models, and I did put together the book with Shelley Roche-Chevet, Innovations in NLP in 2011, but we've been creating a whole lot more models, and that just leads up to 2011. So the source of creativity, and I wish I could claim credit for all of those, but it was really collaborative thinking with a lot of other people that's led to us thinking, we're frustrated here, we're blocked here, what can we do? Let's invent something new. And so that's been going on for a long time. The front page of the website, we keep updating it pretty regularly and spending money to do that for the international one. And now if you go to the international website and you go to trainers, you'll see, pull down that menu, find an institute, and you can click on the institute and go to their website. Find a trainer, and we have the list of all the trainers and their email. And then you can find trainers on every one of the local institute websites. So the website is that umbrella of credibility that provides all of us some credibility. This was the leadership in 2010. You will notice myself and David. You'll see Omar, Emily, Lena and Colin, Cheryl Lucas, Jermaine, Lean from Norway, and Martin Urban there. This is the leadership team in front of the warehouse where the Neuro-Semantic Publications is, and can't see everybody real clear here. Tim Goodenough is the tall guy in the white shirt. Joseph Scott, I mentioned him this afternoon, is over on that side. The team keeps changing because now the team is selected by the institutes. So every institute will select someone to represent on the team. We've got 18 people now on the team, and we meet once a month, sometimes a little bit more, and we have constant communication, and it helps us to know what's going on. What's going on in Egypt? What's going on in Mexico? What's going on in Hong Kong, China? And so it helps us to understand what's going on. And the basic decisions occur at the institute level. And that's what we want. Now, all the funds go to the institutes. Every time you pay your trainer's fee, it'll go right to the institute. More trainers we have in a country, more money to do conferences and do website and do other things. So everything goes to the institute. Every meta-coach pays it directly to the institute. And so that's how we have organized that. And just we're generating lots of trainings, lots of new trainings, just constantly. I can't even read that, it's so dark. Neuro-Semantics. The 21st century access into the matrix of your mind, emotion, body, system. You can master the matrix of your frames. When we did the 40th year anniversary of NLP in 2015 at Santa Cruz, there's Robert Diltz, there's Frank Puselic, myself, and then Ian McDermott. He and I wrote the book Collaborative Leader. Ian runs one of the most successful NLP centers in the world in London, international seminars, and so he's been a very successful person running a seminar. So the future. What will the future be for NLP and Neuro-Semantics? That's the unknown. You are the future. You are the future. Now there's a lot more to say about all that, so if you have questions, about NLP, Neuro-Semantics, some of the stories, we've got a little bit of time to do that.
Boom, boom, boom. Hello.
It's on.
It's on. Okay. How did you get into NLP?
How did I get into NLP?
Yeah.
In 1985, in Grand Junction, Colorado, I had read in the Leadership Journal, which was a Christian journal of leaders, something about the visual auditory kinesthetic system for pastors. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Didn't think anything of it. Later that year, at a particular church, there was a concert, and two brothers were singing a concert. One brother was totally dumb. He could not speak, but he could sing. He had dived into a pool and broke something in his collarbone, and he could not speak, but he could sing. So these two brothers went around and they were doing concerts, singing. They were excellent singers. So I went to the concert, and during the break, I talked to the one person who could talk, because I couldn't, sign language is a little bit hard. So I said, so what else do you do? I asked him that, what else do you do? And he said, I used to be a therapist. And he was about 35. I said, used to? He said, yeah, once I could cure phobias in 10 minutes, I got tired. And I thought, this guy has just lost it. So I just went away, but, it was that crazy talk. So at the end of the concert, I came up, I said, okay, how do you cure phobia in 10 minutes? He said, you haven't read Frogs to Princes. I said, what's that? He said, well, it's a book. And I said, give me an idea. How do you cure a phobia in 10? Because I was a therapist at the time, and I could guarantee a person in 3 months or 6 months, going through the hierarchy of fears and then relaxation, I could help a person in 3 months to get over a phobia. 10 minutes? And he wouldn't tell me. Now, I don't have a closure program, but that did it. the next day, I went around town trying to find Frogs and the Princes. Nobody had it in town, so I ordered it from a bookstore in Denver, and so a couple days later I got it, and I was reading it, and I was reading Frogs into Princes, which is kind of a wild book. It's a seminar book, and I came to the place about phobia. Well, it just so happened that week I had a client, and he said, "Is there any faster way of doing this?" Because I was going through the relaxation with the hierarchy of fears, and I said, "Well, I've been reading this stuff, but I don't think it works. I don't understand how it could work." And he said, "Well, could you read it to me?" So, not believing in it, not being congruent, I just read the thing to him. And I read at the very last, "Okay, now try to have the phobia again." And he said, "I can't." I said, "Come on." I did. I said, "Come on. Don't fool around here. This is serious." And when he could not have the phobia again, talk about a convincer. One time, it's like, whatever happened there, I just read it, and I didn't believe it, and it worked, in spite of me. What if I believed it? And so that's what got me into NLP. I said, I've got to find out how this stuff works. And so then I traced down Richard Bandler in San Diego and got my training. Some of you know Bob, and some of you have asked about Bob. Bob retired a couple years ago. He had his back fused when he was a young man, like 27. He had vertebrae fused together, and he lived his whole life in pain. It was just constant pain, and everything any of us tried to do just didn't seem to work. And so he was on a lot of medication. And when we co-trained together, he always sat and I stood, and he wanted, because he couldn't stand. After a while, it just got worse and worse. And then, I don't know, 10 years ago, some doctor convinced him to unfuse the back, and they had new technology to unfuse it. And they thought that would take away a lot of the pain, but it didn't. So he's in a lot of pain, and he swims every morning trying to ameliorate the pain. He's stopped all of the activities, but we write and talk about some of the good old days. Bob is 77 now, and so I try to honor him wherever I go, because he's been such a key person. So Bob, if you're watching,
so when did meaning stop being a mere representation and became reflexivity? This is when you added all the outer game added to it? Is this the addition that Neuro-Semantics brought to it?
so you're asking, when does it stop being a representative?
A mere representation.
A mere representation. Well, as soon as you do any thinking or feeling about something, now you got representation and the thoughts and feelings that frames it, which is the essence of the human consciousness.
Adding to it how this will make you react in the outer world. Is this the addition that you made in Neuro-Semantics, or?
Well, so you got representation. Now you've got the framing, the meta framing of it, and it's making our internal world richer so that we can do all kinds of things on the outside. So now we can have understandings and concepts and calculate all kinds of things and with intentions, and now we can do all kinds of things that animals can't ever do. So NLP worked on it, and Robert Dilts created the first meta levels. The mistake he made was to say that they're a hierarchy, because then it's like it's this level and that level, as if but it's too dynamic. It's just too dynamic, keeps changing, and there's so much more. in your manual, the Psychology of APG, there's 104 meta levels mentioned in the meta dimensions. If you haven't read that article, it's in the back of the Psychology of APG.
So we heard a lot about all of the leaders of the field of NLP. So if we look at the field today, except of yourself, who are the current leaders of the field of NLP that are taking NLP to the next level? And I know that there are some leadership summits of NLP yearly, but who are the figures right now?
Well, first and foremost, Robert. Robert keeps on developing things and doing things, and so Robert does that. Robert Dilts, along with Judith, to some extent. Tim Halbram and Chris Halbram, they're key leaders. Ian McDermott, key leaders. Joseph O'Connor has been contributing a lot, especially in the early 2000s. And there's a lot of new ones coming up. The NLP Leadership Summit, we've got 170 people, I think. You have to be a leader in the field for at least 15 years. And most of them have 20 years or 30 years. So it's the elders of the tribe. That's how Frank and I created it. And we said that we want the elders of the tribe to come together because they should have the wisdom and they should want to pull this together because it's your legacy. And so we started that 2012. It's now 10 years. Up until the pandemic, we met every second year for a 3-day summit. And it's just an association. And out of that association, 4 years ago, the idea became, let's create a global body. So we have a global body. And so if you go to NLP Global Body.org, you'll see the beginnings of the global body. And I think there's 7 or 8 associations part of that. I registered in the state of Colorado. It's a nonprofit organization now. Heidi Huron created the website. We have set up a PayPal account so that the associations are members. So an individual can't join it. Associations join it. And so you'll see there all the different organizations that are part of it, Neuro-Semantics being one. And these associations are associating together to be a global body. And we've just recently created a seal. And to the trainers, the certified trainers, I sent them that seal. And the seal says, my training is recognized and is credible under the auspices of the global body. If you go to NLP Summit, NLP Leadership Summit, summit.org, you'll see on the front page the name of about 140 of us. And these really are the who's who of NLP. And so if somebody, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, if someone says, is the American Board of NLP, is that recognized? No, it's not on there. Is the National Federation of NLP on there? Nope, they're not on there. So an association or an individual has to apply, and we have a little process about accepting members, and it's an association. It's let's cooperate together, let's work together. We don't have to agree, but we have minimal standards. So practitioner, the minimum is 7 days, and the minimum of master practice 12 days. And most organizations have higher than that. We have higher than that. And so this is a way of trying to facilitate the future of NLP. This last week we've had a crisis on the NLP Leadership Summit, And I had to, those of you who are on that know about that, that we've got a lot of just rigid, narrow-minded people who are still leading in the field of NLP. And so at least we've got Neuro-Semantics, which this is the only international association of NLP on the planet. This the only one. I mean, we're in 60 countries. And my goal is to win all of these people, and they'll become neurosemanticists. But it won't happen in my lifetime. It'll happen hopefully in yours.
Maybe you answer my question. You talk about future, and we say we are the future. So, what is your vision to the next step?
Well, my vision is mostly with Neuro-Semantics. I'm doing this because I believe in NLP and I want to see it, and I'm trying to provide some leadership there, but it's hard going. So my vision is with Neuro-Semanticists, and we got 10 institutes now. Some institutes have 2 or 3 countries underneath them. So as soon as they get more trainers and they're ready to launch out, we'll have more institutes. And my vision is it's going to operate from the institute level, and it's going to be dynamic in every country that fits their culture. Because it's craziness to think that some central place can make decisions for everybody everywhere. It's just because we believe to value people and their cultures. So my vision is that. One of the commitments I made many, many years ago was that I'm going to make as much money as I can so I can leave that in Neuro-Semantics. And I want to do that as an example so that other people, after you make lots and lots of money, in your will, don't designate that so much money goes to the ISNS, International Society of Neuro-Semantics. And so one of my vision is to leave. I'd like to leave, if I can live long enough, I'd like to leave about $5 or $10 million to Neuro-Semantics.
Wow. Thank you, Michael.
And what if we had a whole bunch more people doing that?
Thank you.
Because when an organization doesn't have enough money, you can't do much.
Exactly.
And we've done 3 international conferences, and we're planning the next one next year in Fort Lauderdale with Jason Snyder, the 4th Neuro-Semantic Associate Conference, 3-day conference. And part of my vision is that's homecoming. And we did one in Colorado, we did one in Jakarta, we did one in Malaysia.
Malaysia and Hong Kong.
And then Hong Kong. And so next year in Florida. And so we'd like to take that around the world. We'd like the institutes to sponsor those. And so that's part of the vision. Well, I hope this has been informative and insightful and fun. So tomorrow is presentation day. So thank you. Tomorrow is presentation day. So when you come in the morning, there'll be a presentation. We'll give you some clues about what to do. Who's up for tomorrow for presenting? All right, be sure to get a good night's sleep. Don't worry. No, let me rephrase that, because that's don't worry. Feel good. And we'll see you in the morning.